I would start with work ethic. If you're at a call, volunteer to write the report. If there's someone who needs to be interviewed that nobody else wants to talk to, volunteer to do it. Get used to doing more work. Embrace the idea of doing more. I would love to go out and work one more call with P.E. Jones again. Jones would never marginalize a soul. If there was a homeless person there, he'd go and speak to each of them. He'd control the situation. But he talked to everybody. I would work on how I treat people. I would really get serious about treating everyone with respect, and that's hard. It's really challenging to think of other people that way, because a lot of people do things to make you angry. Being respectful and kind to someone else who doesn't want to be around you is challenging. If you want to make any interviewer, from brand new rookie to most senior detective, better, teach them this. Ask an open-ended question. Ted, tell me about, explain to me, describe. Remember, Ted, tell me, explain, describe. It's a principally open-ended question. Then let them answer and do not interrupt them. Now, I want to say one thing about the Dallas Police Department. I've had the opportunity to work with police departments worldwide, multiple continents. I'm talking Botswana, Accra, Ghana, Budapest, Hungary, all kinds of European police departments all across North America. I'm going to tell you right now, every person in this room, every Dallas police officer that I'm sitting next to is a superior law enforcement officer, and I've seen cops from around the world. Dallas is good. Dallas is innovative. Dallas leads. That's just all there is to it.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Using the fact that we experience physiological changes when there's a fear of the action, our ancestors recognized an advantage that they could use to resolve questions of untruthfulness during an interrogation. One of the physiological observations that were made concerned the dryness of the mouth that occurred when someone was deceptive. In China, circa 1000 BC, individuals were told to place uncooked rice in their mouths and hold it while they were questioned during the interrogation. The truthful individual whose mouth contained saliva would spit out wet, globular pieces of rice, while the deceptive individuals would spit out the dry rice kernels. Supposedly in Africa, suspects were asked to pass an ostrich egg to one another, and if one dropped, it was the guilty party. The physiological basis of this test was probably the idea that the more nervous the individual, the more likely the egg would be dropped because of their fear of detection. During the Middle Ages, people turned to torture and humiliation to extract confessions and punish the transgressors during the interrogation process. Then in 1692, the famous Salem witch trials began in the United States. These trials resulted in the hanging of 19 men and women. They were accused of being witches. Some said that witches would be identified by being bound and thrown into water. If they came to the surface and floated, they were a witch. If they drowned, they were the innocent. In 1880, New York City detective Thomas Brenz coined the phrase, the third degree. The first degree was the policeman who apprehended the suspect. The second degree was the investigative detective. And the third degree was Brenz and his interrogation tactics. He would use any means to obtain a confession from someone he believed was guilty, including trickery, deceit, or physical beatings. Then a seismic shift in policing happened with the interrogations. In the 1940s and into the 50s, when polygrapher John Reed introduced the Reed method, and as life evolved, so does policing and its tactics. Over time, certain tactics and methods will eventually show weaknesses, and new tactics must be presented to protect the rights of all involved. Today's guest graduated from Plano High School in 1979. Graduated from East Texas State University in 1984. He put himself through college, earning money as a cook, and was a cook at the original restaurant known today as Chili's. He's been married to his boss, Julie, for 39 years, father to 2 adult sons, and now enjoys retired life in Florida as a fishing boat captain. However, before he donned the captain hat, he served the city of Dallas for 28 years, 15 of those in Dallas homicide. Today he is taking a break from that boat, joining us in the studio to talk about a topic he is an expert in: interviews and interrogations. ATO family, please welcome Dallas Badge 5558, retired Dallas PD Detective John Palmer. Detective Palmer, welcome to the stage.
Retired Detective Palmer.
Yeah, I hit on that in the intro. I want to welcome on special guest co-host. She's back to the mic, Andrea Isom from Dallas Homicide. Kent Wolverton's here. And also we dragged Danny Canetti onto the mic.
Yeah, I definitely had to be here for this one with John. I was in John's office a lot when I was a street cop.
Got a lot of history with Danny. Got some history with Andrea. Good stuff.
Yeah, we got you
catches.
off the fishing boat to come in here.
Yes.
When's the last time you've actually walked into the police headquarters?
I have to think about that for a moment. I was here.
Been a minute then.
It was last year.
Oh, really? Okay, it hadn't been that long.
Sometime last year, I think.
Well, we just before we came down to sit down for this episode, we went and we took a swim through homicide, and you came in with your tab 7 shirt on. And I was like, well, you said that you feel like home here, and I said, well, let's go up there and see them.
It looks a little different though from when you were here last, I imagine.
It does. A lot of fresh faces, a lot of new faces up there. The same old piled up equipment as usual.
Oh yeah.
I was hoping Valdez would be there because I told John that you were going to come in. He goes, oh, he's great. He actually said he would like to sit in on him, but he couldn't make it.
He had a double last night.
Okay.
I wonder what he's doing right now.
Yeah. All right. This idea for this episode, we're going to have it more career-driven and specific with your DPD time and your time in homicide and what you've done after and what you teach and what you're an expert in this interrogation and interview skills. Okay. And I want to start off, though, graduated in Plano High, 1979.
Class of 79.
Okay.
Plano Wildcats.
And you went to East Texas State University, which is now Texas A&M at Commerce.
Yes.
I took some classes there whenever it was still ETSU whenever I graduated.
Go Lions, class of 84.
Yeah, my brother, Paul Smith, shout out Paul, he actually played football there as a walk-on. You want to tell us about when you hired on. You graduated in class of 84, but you started DPD when?
January the 15th, 1987. I applied the first time in 1983.
Really?
That's a pretty good story, too.
Tell us.
I'm a senior at East Texas State, and I'm struggling. And I'm not 100% sure I'm going to graduate. I was an awful student. And so I was studying to be radio, television, production, engineering, that kind of thing. And I had low confidence. That's where I was headed. And so I was engaged, and I brought my then fiancée. By the way, a shout out to my sweet wife, Julie. Our 40th wedding anniversary is in August. And
Congratulations.
Congratulations. That's a long time.
She should get a hero bar for putting up with me and the rest of the Dallas Police Department.
We can make that happen. We can ATO can put something together like
There
that.
should be a spouse bar, I feel like.
Yeah.
We're putting up with, like,
Yes.
especially, like, people I work with.
She was a teacher too.
Yeah, she taught
Preschool
with
teacher.
Oh, wow.
she taught with Danny's wife for a while.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
His wife and my wife had worked together at the same school.
That's awesome. Two adult son or kids. Okay.
Yes, two sons.
Two sons.
One is an engineer for Intel. He's got a PhD in physics. He's a foot shorter than me. He's got bright blue eyes and weighs 100 pounds less. I hold a switch to the hospital theory on that.
Yeah. Hey.
And my other son is an adult with autism. He still lives with me. He's a graduate from Dallas Academy. He graduated from Texas A&M. He was the valedictorian of his high school class. And he presently works in an old folks home where he's a floor technician. And he is the happiest, most well-adjusted, awesome human being you'll ever meet. He is just in his work. He's in a good place. They love him, and he loves them.
That's amazing. Well, you know, he had great caretakers and people in his life to love and take care of him and show him the way.
You know, I think you're right about that, and I'm also well aware of the fact that me being out of the house so much working cases probably resulted in my sons being better people.
Yeah, well, your boss at home, she's going to be smiling listening to this.
She needs a hero bar for that too.
Okay. So tell us about that. You applying and then how that went in '83.
So at the time in '83, I'm flipping burgers. I'm working at the original Chili's, if you will.
I've heard of that place.
Yes, it was crazy. It was Greenville Avenue, 1979. There was a lot of stuff going on there. It was easy to witness a felony. Let's put it that way.
It still is, I think.
Yeah. So I go downtown and I apply, and I start the process, and then my then fiance tells my father, and he objects. He goes, "I don't want you to do that. We're not sending you to school for all this." And I was paying for school too at the time, but my father objects, and I had a deep respect for my dad, so I withdrew the application in 1983. I finished up at East Texas State, and I sent resumes all over Texas trying to get hired in the broadcast field, and just couldn't get it done. And so I'm still working in this kitchen as a college graduate, and that is, it's not what I signed up for.
Yeah.
So I guess it was late in '86, I went back downtown and I reapplied. This time I didn't tell anybody. And eventually my wife started figuring stuff out, and she said, "What are you up to?"
You didn't tell her?
Not at first.
Okay. All right.
But she, to her credit, she's a smart girl. She said, "What's going on?" "Well, I'm going to go down there and apply again." And she's like, "Hey, your dad doesn't approve of this." And I said, we'll figure that out when we get there. I get all the way through to background, and Investigator Suber is doing my background, and he calls me up and he says, "Hey, John, yeah, your dad won't take my phone call." He says, "We're not in the business of breaking up families, so I need for you to go get right with your dad and get him to call me." So I go find my father and said, "Hey, what's the problem? You can't talk to the guy?" And he goes, "Well, I don't want you to be a cop." And so I'm not asking you to approve or disapprove. I just need for you to honestly answer his questions. That's it. He goes, "Well, I can do that." And he called the guy back up, and it was just a few weeks later, I'm in class 199.
Who are some of your other classmates?
I sat next to Steve O'Brien. I'm still very close friends with Ed Fleming. Let's see. Shelley Dennis was in my class. I knew I'm going to draw. Willie Williams.
In what year was that?
We started January the 15th, 1987. We graduated May 22 of the same year.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about the 1988 was such a horrible year for this city.
I like it. Hails the exact dates.
Yes.
Man of detail there.
I'll tell you, the thorough memory is not always a benefit. Trust me on that. That's a two-edged sword.
Well, I want to also congratulate you on finally living your dream of the broadcast career, being on this podcast now. So
This is awesome.
all these many years later, you're behind the mic and you finally had your headsets on and you're on a mic.
Yes, finally.
Yeah.
show wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
comes
The first
full circle.
48 was not good enough. So you had to.
Now TV star and radio star, or
Right.
podcast star, I should say.
Yeah.
The first 48 thing was kind of funny too.
We're going to get into that. So when you finally get out, graduate, you get out on the streets, where did you go?
North Central.
Oh, wow.
It was a brand new station. If you put that on your sheet anywhere you went, I don't remember. I think. Well, I'll tell you who else went up there with me was Sartain, Bodie.
Okay.
He went up there with me, and Pam Springer, and I can't think of. I can see his face. He was. He's long since retired. He's a good guy.
Was it called the Country Club then?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It started off with that.
They called it that, but it was out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there was it's built up immensely since then.
Yeah, traffic sucks around it.
I'll tell you though what's interesting about working up there during that era. Since they just opened it, they pulled people from every other substation, and if you were training, you'd come out every night, and they'd immediately, they tell you there in detail who wants to work 3 and who wants to work 4, and if you had a rookie, you went. So I answered about as many calls in Pleasant Grove as a rookie as I did at North Central.
Pleasant Grove. It might have been a little bit more pleasant then than it is now.
I got married in Pleasant Grove.
Okay. A lot of my family grew up over there, and it was pleasant then. way back
Do you know
then.
the difference between Urbandale and Pleasant Grove?
No.
See, if you did, then I'd have to call you a Grovite.
No. Well, look, I was more South Dallas.
Urbandale's the original Pleasant Grove.
It's a separate part of Pleasant Grove.
Yeah, it's right over there off Bruton and Jim Miller.
It's
I got
like,
married at Urban Independent Methodist Church.
Or sorry, military and
Yeah.
Jim Miller. Yeah.
It's like Oak Cliff being part of the Southwest. It's
Yeah.
like its
Yeah.
own little city.
Where are you from? I'm from Urbandale.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I try to steer clear of the Grove. I
You
picked
go-
up the car.
You go over there on the signs, you'll see it'll have the street name, but it'll say Urbandale.
It does.
And then on some of the signs, real small.
If you look at the sign in
fine
front of that
print.
church, my wife's grandmother paid for it.
Nice.
That was our fee for the church, for the wedding.
So I'm going to ask you though, what was your favorite part about when you? It was a long journey to become a cop in with Dallas PD. Once you got immersed in that, what struck you the most? What was your favorite part of it?
I think I would have done second phase of FTO training for free. I can't describe all the stuff I saw. I got into a car with my first watch FTO, and that was just amazing. I remember the first call I went out on, and I knew then that I'm where I belong. I'd wanted to be a cop my whole life. It just wasn't discussed. I don't come from a family of law enforcement at all, and I think I'm the one and only in my family who's ever been in law enforcement.
I got to ask you why though. I mean, what about the profession that drew you to it?
I sincerely felt called to serve. I loathe bullies of any form, and if I can find someone who's in any way a bully and in their ability to do that, I'm all about that.
I like it. So you worked in detective assignments. Can you kind of walk the listener through those assaults?
I'll tell you one more thing. I started the police academy on January the 15th. And on January the 14th, I told my dad I'd be a homicide detective.
How did that go?
He shook his head. You know what shocked me about that? They issued all the gear the week before I started the academy. I came home with everything, including the gun. I had all the uniforms. I hadn't even started the academy yet. I had all that stuff.
Did you trade that gun in at the pawn shop temporarily for cash and then later, like some officers may have back in the day?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I had the last shift at the restaurant on Tuesday, and I started the academy on Thursday. I got one day off in between, so I didn't have time. I was busy doing laundry.
So why homicide? Why did you want to go that route?
I can't stand an unsolved puzzle. I have the need to figure out what happened. I don't know. I truly believe I was called. It was a calling for me. I'm not saying I was really good at it, but it's a need I had within me that I don't fully understand.
Well, I'm saying you're really good at it, so you don't have to because you are.
Yeah,
kind,
listener,
thank
he is extremely humble. So, when did you start homicide in Dallas?
I started in May of 1998.
Okay, who were some of the major players up there whenever you got up there?
Well, I have a huge respect for Larry Lewis, Gary Kirkpatrick, God rest his soul, Dan Triple, Jesse Trevino was up there then, Ken Penrod, massive respect for Ken Penrod. Carlton Marshall transferred out. He got promoted, and I took his spot. Let's see, Steve LeWillier was up there. Linda Irwin. Oh, Linda Irwin's a very cool human being. I learned a lot just being near her. Dan Lusty. I love me some Dan Lusty. Randy Laboda, Jackie Brady, Anthony Wynn, Marvin Ned. I'm going to tell you, working with Marvin Ned, straight up fun. He is one of the original shit magnets. I watched him get assaulted in front of the elevator at the courthouse once.
In the courthouse.
He got attacked. I watched the guy run him, attack him. It was awesome.
When you got up there, what was the reputation of Dallas homicide? I mean, we've talked about it before with Detective Isom's episode, going back to Captain Fritz days, of the reputation of this unit and this department in city. What was it like whenever you got up there?
There was big expectations that you were going to work hard. That's one of the first things they were interested in was your work ethic. They wanted to know that you're going to be thorough and diligent. They don't want you to complain, yet they all did. They just don't want you to complain about the job. They were complaining about everything else. I was my first trainer up there was Dan Triple, God rest his soul, and the lieutenant at the time was Waldrop. And Ron Waldrop pulled me into his office, and he was very blunt with me. He said, "Look, I'm going to read every document you write. I'm going to look at all your work for the first 2 years." And so there is and ought to be a lot of scrutiny. A lot of these cases you get one chance at, just one chance. And so they want to make the best of that chance. There's, I would describe it as an unspoken, unwritten commitment. You need to be committed to this process. You're committed to someone you never meet. And you're gonna, like the vast majority of people who become homicide victims, contributed to their own demise. And so you kind of got to have an open mind.
Who was, as far as your training went, whenever you started, who influenced you the most early on?
That's difficult to say. That's difficult because we worked as teams. There was just I was surrounded by so many good people. I think it's fair to say that P.E. Jones, he was in robberies at the time. I can remember the moment where I decided to become a better interviewer. I just interviewed someone and it had gone very poorly, and I'm walking out of the building, and I'm with Jones, and I asked him, give me some feedback on that, please. And I knew it would. Jones wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. And he asked me one question. So I just got one question for you. And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Do you really think that you listened to that person?" And I internalized that. And I think that there are some pivotal moments in the homicide unit where things actually really start changing. And it's 2003 when we first occupied this building. I was over at 106 prior to that. We moved into this building, and in 2004 we began recording all of the interviews on video. So prior to that, you had to ask somebody else for feedback. And so in 2004, you get the video and you can start watching it. And that's super awkward to watch yourself talk to someone else. You guys should know this doing these interviews. The sound of your own voice coming from a different source in your own head is somewhat awkward, right? And so now you're watching yourself and you begin to realize, wow, I should have just shut up and let that guy talk.
I cringe all the time at my voice when I hear it on the radio. I
understand. That's how you sound to everybody else is not the way you sound to yourself.
No, I learned that early on with the old answering machines when somebody at the home and just sound like an idiot and have to record it 20 different times to make it sound even somewhat presentable. But something like this it's out there. You just got to say, hell with it. This is how I talk, and it's just going to let it go and get over it. Get over yourself. That's what I tell myself all the time.
That's sound advice for all police officers. Get over yourself.
Yeah. It's kind of carried me through all these years. Whenever you got up there, did you have a natural knack for anything that you noticed that stood out? We're going to get into your interviewing and that process for you, but did you have a certain skill that you noticed naturally early on that you were fine?
I'm not sure skill's the right word, but I am naturally curious. I am unrelenting. Like once I get on a problem, I'm going to chase a problem, and look for solutions as many ways as possible. And that I think that mindset, not necessarily a skill, if you will, is what, I don't know if it distinguished me, because I was a lot of very good detectives. It's what kept me going. It's the ability to self-reflect and then improve is super important towards improving at anything you're doing. And so that's where the humility or the humble mindset comes in. Because if I don't humble myself, I'm never going to get better.
Did you work you worked in homicide during the Jamaican drug wars?
I got there at the end of it. I got there. I went to felony assaults first, and
that was busy, I'm sure.
That was pretty fun too. That was crazy fun. That was just crazy in general. But leading up to that, I knew I wanted to be in homicide, and they changed the policy department wide about interviewing for positions. And if someone applied, no matter where you are, you got an interview. Period. And so I'm still in patrol. To get to homicide, you had to have investigative experience. I applied. They had to interview me. So I sat down with Gary Kirkpatrick and for a brief interview. And I said, I'm sorry to waste your time. I know I won't get this job, but I need for you to know that I want to be there when I do have the experience. And that impressed him. And then he and I had a good conversation. Then I got interviewed to go to felony assaults by R.T. Smith, God rest his soul, fine sergeant. And he and I just hit it off. And it was funny. He told me, he says, I'm not going to pick you. He said, I'm going to pick somebody else because I already know who I want. He says, but I'm going to get you soon after that. And okay. So he says, I need for you to apply again. And some months passed, and he called me back, and he said, hey, they're going to let me fill 4 on this opening. You still want to come? And that's when I went over in March of 97. And I worked with Richard Lopez and Theo Weisenborn and Dave Singer, Paul Ocknett, and there were more back there.
Yeah, I worked with Richard and with Paul too. I mean, they're still
Rudy
there.
Contreras was
Rudy,
back.
Yeah, Rudy was there when I was there.
So they were really good. They taught me case management, how to work a flow, because the volume of work then was extraordinary. It was on the heels of all the Jamaican wars when we were having, I think it was, I was still in patrol. In about 1990, we had over 500 murders. In 91, they did it again, and they gradually tapered off. But when you were in patrol then, you went to a shooting or a cutting several times a week. I mean, it was not unique.
Why don't you guys explain what the Jamaican Wars were for the listeners? And we have officers on this department who don't know about Jamaican Wars.
Detective?
So the Jamaican Wars were about who was going to control the flow of crack cocaine is what that was really about. The there was conflict between the in-place local organized crime and then the Jamaican organized crime coming out of New York mostly, and I think Jamaica itself. And I've had some people talk to me since then that conflicted that. It was more about internal conflict with the Jamaicans themselves who was in control. So I'm not real sure on all that. But I can tell you that it was the way they solved problems was by shooting people.
I mean, I found old logbooks from the 90s, and they have Jamaican yes or no, like Jamaican involvement. There was that many. So like
Yes.
they were tracking the stats by that because it was so prevalent. Interesting.
Some of those shootings had hallmarks. You'd find somebody with both kneecaps shot, and then they'd check yes on the Jamaican thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like did you have, die from COVID and you're in a car wreck? John, how many, roughly, I know you don't give me an exact number, but how many homicide cases do you think that you were lead detective on in your time with Dallas?
I actually don't have that number. I never quantified
Ballpark?
it. Ballpark? About 140.
Okay. Are there a couple that stand out that you can kind of walk the listener to? Because there's a lot of people out there that they love true crime stories.
Well, it's funny. Andrea just asked me about one of them. I worked on one of them for more than 20 years. There was a series of killings of Mexican girls, and they called them meseras. They called them taxi dancers. And the suspect's name was Jose Cifuentes. He did the first case in February of 1998, and then the second one was in May of 98, and I got that one. And third one was in 04, and Steve Reidler and Juan Salas got that case. And anyway, I went to every Spanish-speaking bar in Dallas, Texas. I promise you that. All of them. Trying to figure out who knew this poor girl. She was last seen over at Mike's Dance Land over off Samuel. And we found her up on Harry Hines. She'd been strangled. She was a mother. The next of kin on that was heartbreaking. You go in there and she's got 2 little kids. The children's father was he was one of the 2 Verheen brothers, and he was in prison out in California doing some significant federal time for meth trafficking. And so these kids were now being raised by extended family, and it was difficult. The thing was cold. We found one guy who was interesting. Get a warrant. We find just enough to get a warrant for a blood draw back then. It was before buccal swabs. And it was not him. It didn't match. And then in 04, another case pops up with Steve Reidler. And this time they get a tip on it. And the tip leads them to Jose Cifuentes. And then there was enough similarities in the way the crimes were committed and the method of operation and the victim selection and all that stuff to really make us think it was him. And at that time, the DNA testing was a year and a half out. If you submitted DNA, it took a year and a half to get it. Well, they find the guy, Juan Salas, interviews him, and he confesses to the one murder. And then they briefly ask him about the other 2, and he denies those. Then they get the DNA sample from him. He's taken to jail, and while he's waiting, he makes bond. And then he flees to Mexico. Once he gets to Mexico, he kills 2 more girls. And then the Mexican authorities, they arrest him. And he does a solid decade plus, 11 years in a Mexican penitentiary. And when he gets out, he does what every good person should do when they're fresh out of prison. He opens up a Facebook page with his real name.
Reasonable.
I may have to go home and start a second Facebook page just because of that guy, but I don't know. Anyway, Noe Camacho up in Coques did a fine job, finds this guy, and I think it's him, and he's sending me these pictures. You think it's this guy? And I don't know if it's this guy. I haven't seen him. You need to ask Juan. And so they get federal authorities and Interpol involved, and they go down to Mexico and they surveil him, and they're convinced it's him. We've got a print card on the guy since he's been arrested, and so we wound up sending a print card down to Mexico. And somewhere in there, I have actually retired from the police department and gone to work for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And so I'm back and forth now with the DA's office and with NOE and all the other really good Dallas homicide folks. And they conclude it's him, and they start the process to extradite him, and they bring him back. And I was actively involved with that thing from 1998 until it was adjudicated in 2020.
How many homicides was he good for that you know of, or think?
In Dallas, 3, total of 5 that we're 100% sure of. I think Juan did a very interesting interview on him. We call a timeline interview. Mm-hmm. And
can you describe that
right now?
Yeah, please. Yeah, you can just what a timeline interview is. There's a lot of listeners that may not be aware of that.
We're during a timeline interview. We're not necessarily interested in getting you to confess. What we're looking for is information. Like we don't need this guy to confess again. We've got one on you that's pretty good. We're 100% admissible. What we're looking for is more victims, more evidence, things like that. And so Juan starts off with asking him about, all right, we want to know where you're working, and we want to know what clubs are you partying in. And so we take those 2 factors right there. And third thing was who you're running with, who are your buddies. And he actually doesn't go fully sequential. He starts it off with when you first arrive in Dallas for the very first time, which would have been about 1997. And he's working as a mechanic, and we knew that about him, that he's an auto mechanic. And they find the third victim, by the way, in a salvage yard on a car where he'd been pulling parts. And so you get him to talk about what clubs he's in, and you look for points in time. And what we're trying to do is collect facts, and we're mining his memory. And it's going real good. And they get right on through to the part where he flees back to Mexico, and he openly is admitting all these things. And the whole time, Juan is just really very carefully building rapport. And it's when we say rapport, it's not like they're becoming buddies. They're gaining a very high level of cooperation. Well, he's conditioning the guy to speak. He's conditioning the guy to have some control of the interview. He's giving him all these things. He's just guiding him. He's giving him boundaries on these timeline, right? And so there's more and more information. And then the guy gets curious and goes, why are you asking me all these questions? And Juan just says, look, dude, you know what this is about. That's all he says. So... yeah, it's a moment where there's a principle called dissonance. Have you ever heard of dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is where your stated goals or your stated beliefs are different than your actual behaviors. So I'm saying one thing and doing something different. So this guy knows in his head he's been killing people here, right? But we're not asking him about that. We're asking him about all the details. And then he goes, well, what's this about? Well, he knows exactly what it's about, and Juan addresses that dissonance. You know what this is about? Mm. And he goes, it's about the girls, isn't it? He goes, yeah, it is. Well, let me tell you about that. And he confesses 5 murders to Juan Salas.
Well, and like what you've always talked about before is, cognitive load too. And cognitive load is when you're talking with somebody and they have so much on their mind about keeping their lies straight and how am I going to get around this interrogation. And so you take their mind off of it. But in current practices, we do this in different ways too, where the questions are innocuous. What's your phone number? What's this? And to them, it's a basic question. It's nothing to be afraid of, but I'm going to use it in a different way. Like when I ask, what kind of iPhone is that? Is that the Face ID kind? Now I've proven no one else could use that phone but you, because only your face will open it. So if a CDR hits, now I've locked you into that location. And all they're thinking is I'm asking about an iPhone. They don't understand the significance of it.
But something like that is alleviating for them to have an easy answer that's the truth, that they don't have to constantly expend energy on to...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, how long are you from Dallas area? Are you from this? And it doesn't seem like it's anything of significance because they're like, it doesn't matter where I'm from. But one of the best things I've ever heard from this generation was if they're talking, you're winning. it may not be anything that's I killed these people, but it's building to something else. It's getting the rapport, but also little details that may seem insignificant at the time, but then you look at your case file and you're like, holy shit, that was actually important, or that purple car, or whatever the detail is. Yeah. And the more thorough you are, the bigger you expand it, the more those details, they show up, and you're like, it all comes full circle, and it makes sense in the end. So it's just about talking and staying in the game for as long as you can with them, because we've always been taught too, you don't walk up and get out of the room until they ask for an attorney.
There's only two ways out of the room.
Yeah.
You either tell us the truth or ask for a lawyer.
Yeah.
I like it.
No bathroom breaks.
No bathroom breaks. No. Give them a big Snapple bottle to hold down there.
No, I give them snacks and food and bathroom. I'm nice.
The snacks and food are interesting. The defense counsel over at the courthouse will call. They'll tell us that the corny dogs have truth serum in them.
Yeah. It's kind of like these aren't my pants, following that line.
Mm-hmm.
I want to stay on the building the rapport and we'll get into another case, but the art and science of investigative interviews, you just touched on rapport. How important is that? I mean, what method do you use and teach?
I'm going to say that is the single most critical thing you're going to do, is build some level of rapport with the person that you're interviewing. And it is so complex as to, you have all these PhDs who don't always agree on the definition of what rapport is. And I like to think of it kind of like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. We don't know what it is. We can't define it, but we know it when we see it. But a detective ought to have the same view of rapport. I've had people shout at me at the top of their lungs, telling the truth in pure anger, or that you've got this anger flowing, and you could arguably define that as rapport. I've held them in my arms while they cried and sobbed and told me the truth. I've had them laugh out loud and tell me horrible things they've done and joke about it, and everything in between. So I would say their true definition is if they're cooperating with you. You've achieved some level of cooperation, some level of information sharing. I think the PhDs will put a lot of different analysis on it, but understanding this person, understanding what motivates them, and getting them to share with you their emotions, things like that, is critical. Like you've got to break down barriers. I would say rapport is having someone you don't know tell you something that makes them uncomfortable.
And that would be your step one, like whenever you go and you sit down with someone.
It's not. I am really reluctant to say that there's steps to an interview.
Okay.
I think that one of the things that occurred years ago, this goes right back to all the murders that were in Dallas in the early 90s. One of the things that detectives would do, the DA's office actually complained, hey, we can't find your witnesses. The people were very transient. They were portable. They would move from apartment to apartment. So we started filling out information sheets on these witnesses and suspects alike, and you found out that as you're asking someone questions about them, you get them to talk about them. One of the favorite questions I had on that sheet was, "It's where do you have kids?" If the answer was yes, where do they go to school? Well, the purpose of that was actually not to find out more about them and build rapport, which really did occur. But if you knew where someone's kid goes to school,
where they lived, yeah,
it's real easy to find them.
Yeah.
And that's something we still use, that exact same template today. It's a personal information sheet with just basic information, but like you said, it also opens up rapport building.
Yes.
And I'll always, without fail, the thing that I always get them to laugh about is I'll ask them date of birth of like their mom or their next to like their wife. They don't know the birthday. I'm like, you better not let her know you forgot her birthday. And he gets a little chuckle, and we're just kind of joking about things like how long have you been married, whatever. And so it just, again, takes their mind off of things. And it's an easy way to make a joke without just, making a joke that makes no sense, and talking about the kids, and those are a handful at that age, right? Or terrible twos, or you got teenagers, I bet you got a lot on your plate. So it's an easy way just to kind of shoot the shit, if you will, with somebody when you're in there for something really serious like murder.
I absolutely agree with
Yeah.
you. That's
why she's here.
I learned from him.
So what's really changed during our lifetimes is quite remarkable. In 2008, 2009, the federal government takes some real interest in why what works in an interview room, and they begin studying what works in an interview room. So look for data. You've got they want to statistically analyze things, and so they start looking for interviews, and they do a process called behavioral coding. They'll view something, and every time the interviewer is, say, empathetic, it gets a mark. Click. If they're accepting of something, it gets a mark. If they're maladaptive, that gets a mark. If they're rude, that gets a mark. If they interrupt, that gets a mark. And they quantify lots and lots and lots of different things all at once. They begin quantifying this. And you can statistically analyze what goes on in an interview, and you can start figuring out very quickly what works poorly and what works better or what works well. And so that's when the stuff really starts getting interesting over time. And one of the things they looked at was the use of this personal information sheet. Dallas is one of the places that was fortunate. Back in 2004, we started recording these interviews, so we are a good source of data. And that data gave us access back to these studies.
So before you even have this interaction with them talking, just the information they're putting down on the sheet, pulling information from them from simple questions on a piece of paper.
Absolutely, yes. It's one of the things I love about Dallas PD. You've been out there, Danny, with us when I've got a picture of you standing on the front yard of a dope house, and there's like 4 or 5 guys in flexicuffs, and there's some of your SWAT buddies, and Metro Squad's coming in there, and they're already picking these guys up, and they're starting to build rapport with these guys. They're lowering their emotional arousal well in advance. You and I both know it's a training operation for interviewing. They're going to go get interviewed later on.
Sure.
But understanding how to treat people and treat people with respect and dignity up front is critical. And I'm going to go off topic slightly. I want to say one thing about the Dallas Police Department. I've had the opportunity to work with police departments worldwide, multiple continents. I'm talking Botswana, Accra, Ghana, Budapest, Hungary, all kinds of European police departments all across North America. And of them, you learn one thing if you're a Dallas cop. When you're at Dallas PD, you look in and you see all of the infighting and you see the conflict, and you draw this opinion of Dallas PD like, oh man, we're just barely getting by. Then when you step out and you compare how Dallas works to all these other PDs, you realize how good we are. I'm going to tell you right now, every person in this room, every Dallas police officer that I'm sitting next to is a superior law enforcement officer, and I've seen cops from around the world. I know I'm off topic, but Dallas is good. Dallas is innovative. Dallas leads. That's just all there is to it.
No, the command staff that listens to this show, they're going to like hearing that. So for recruiting purposes. I'm proud of this
use
department.
That sound bite as
yeah,
recruiting.
yeah, they're going to have that in the recruiter's going to use it.
They're welcome to it. I'm telling you, I've seen cops from all over the place. And I got off topic about rapport building.
No, you're coming from a guy that you have traveled the world seeing law enforcement, and you could speak on that more than anybody else that we've had on. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm very proud of my time here.
We're proud of you. That's why you're here. Active listening, how important is that in an interview?
If you want to make any interviewer from brand new rookie to most senior detective better, teach them this. Ask an open-ended question. Ted, tell me about, explain to me, describe. Remember, Ted, tell me, explain, describe. That's a principally open-ended question. Then let them answer and do not interrupt them. Remember the statistical analysis? Law enforcement worldwide, on average, takes about 7 seconds to interrupt someone once they've asked the question. They'll want a clarification. They'll want a detail. If we could just get people to quit doing that, let them talk without interruption, and then do not judge them for what they say.
Yeah, and I think part of why we interrupt is that a couple of reasons. We don't like dead silence. That's the worst thing in the room, is you're just sitting there and you think that if you interrupt them, they'll go ahead and answer quickly and not think of another excuse. But like you said, when you give them that time, it's a show of respect to them, and that you take them seriously. Now, to your point, I'll let them talk knowing that they're lying and story locking. And personally, I do a lot of mirroring, and I do a lot of, like I'll say, and I'll shake my head yes a lot, not even really subconsciously, but to their mind, I'm buying what they're selling. And I let them keep, right. And so I let them keep going with that. And I think that's something that a lot of females do, especially, is that we just kind of nod along politely and have a smile on our face. But it cuts them go somewhere. And then, like I said, you get the whole story out, and then you come back and break down the lies later. But there's so much more giving you information when you're not being maladaptive and just cutting them off. Like the days of the light in someone's face and screaming, those days are over. We don't scream and just, you did it, and like you don't get anywhere with that.
Well, I'll characterize it this way. There were occasions in the past when those kind of tactics did work, and they worked under heinous crimes.
Yeah.
But when you step back and you look at what works better,
well, and you can always build up to that if necessary, but
Yes.
it's very hard to start out that way and go backwards.
Rapport-based interviewing, I'm telling you, is just statistically far more effective, immensely more effective. And then you can get into some variations on technique and strategy.
Did you have a certain style? And I'm sure it varied and tweaked for the person you were in front of, but did you have a style that you used and kind of an old self-template?
I feel like you had a different style than everyone else in your interviewing. Now, I will say I didn't see you interview really. Like, I was never up in the office and went in the room with you. But I remember, here's my perspective of homicide, is going up there and either catching a suspect or whatever and going there, and kind of like what Andrea and you were talking about, is it's a teamwork. You walk in and all these guys are like sweaty armpits in these dress shirts, and their ties halfway undone because you're bringing them another case, and they're all each like 4 deep in their own cases, and they're all standing up there pacing around talking to each other, bouncing off ideas. And the times I go up there and like, hey, I got so-and-so, they'd kind of look at each other like, I don't know, like, Palmer, get Palmer in here to talk to. Where's Palmer?
I think that my style was simple persistence. I was never going to give up. And I'd like to think I'm kind of like a mirror. I listen to people, and I'm going to reflect back on you what you give to me, and that would be my style. I'm just gonna.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm going to be adaptive. I'm
Open-ended question. I like it, Joe.
I'm learning.
I've listened to your podcast. You've clearly learned to be a good interviewer. It's slightly intimidating to
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking,
no, if like it really does help to have a plan when you go into an interview, to be, be thorough in your preparation about what you're going to do. That often though is a luxury. If you've on very short notice, a lot of times, I'll teach you some homicide slang. It's called laydowns.
I know about those.
A laydown,
I don't get them very often.
They're coveted. A laydown is a case where patrol catches the suspect for you. In other words, call comes in, solved, and they call that a laydown. And everybody loves those. Trust me, because the downside of that is you've got to pack a whole bunch of work into a very short amount of time to get going into the interview. You've really got to figure out what's what. Before you begin, and that can be a little bit challenging. It's fair to say with those cases that sometimes the interview is not critical. I can tell you that you get over to the DA's office, they want the interview. They want a good statement.
I would imagine that the data collection with so much technology that's used now that's would make that more difficult in a case like that, when you say the interview is not as difficult, but trying to run around and quickly on the fly piece together all the other evidence and data, that's pretty difficult.
I will give you one more thing that's changed remarkably during a career. When I first came to homicide, there were no cell phones. I walked into homicide the first time with a pager.
Yeah.
Nice.
Do you guys find when you're testifying that if you don't have the digital evidence and the videos and the cell phone records and the social media stuff that they don't believe you as much as they previously did?
Yeah, I mean, like with the last 20 years, all of the shows, CSI and SVU and all these, they know, like, jury members, they know about all these things and they want everything as much as possible. And then I started in 2015 and we were just getting Facebook records at that time. And now add Snapchat, Instagram, geofencing. I mean, it's easy to have over 500 gigabytes of data on a case.
Yeah, it seems more like you're presenting the evidence more than you are telling your side of what happened at this point. You know, it's changed the way we have to testify because it's no longer this is what I observed and this is what I found. It's here's all the evidence that supports everything that I just said.
That's really more of Andrea's world. I actually left homicide at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, and I went to training. And so I did not carry quite the same level of burden on digital evidence that they did. I like when I first got there, I went to Dallas Police Academy. The words DNA were never spoken. Things changed rapidly during my career. There's this explosion of technology was very interesting. We'd get blood types. In other words, with the same blood type as this person, trying to exclude people, not necessarily include them as an evidence, but try to like exclude them as an evidence, stuff like that.
Just to rule them out, basically.
Yes. And then the DNA popped in and the cellular stuff. And I was, you talk about a remarkable case. I remember quite well the first time that a cell tower dump from Metro PCS was done. It was in Dallas, Texas, and the detective was Rick Duggan. Rick was a very thorough detective, and there was a robbery up on 75, or just off 75. There was a guy, he was going around to the clubs at night, and he'd take their deposits, and he was a courier, and he would go to this bank by morning, and he would make a deposit and a night deposit. He was an armed guard in a uniform. Well, these guys had surveilled him. They set him up, and they shot and killed him during the robbery. And Rick, being real smart, knowing that the cell towers were out there, he knew from witness statements that they'd gotten separated. And from that, he surmised these guys are going to have communicated with each other with cellular technology one way or the other, while they're fleeing. So he goes to Metro PCS and he gets 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after, or maybe a little bit longer after, about a 1 hour or 2 hour window of all communications through this one tower. And at the time they were like, can we do this? And then they came back with, yeah, we can. And they just gave it to us. There was no warrant, no nothing.
Those are the days. I can't imagine.
It used to be a subpoena. You just walk in with just a simple subpoena sign and just email it to him.
You should
and
see
the guy would just email you back.
Warrants, Don. They're like 40 to 50 pages.
I believe that.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting on that case subsequent to that, one of the defense counsel over there raises the issue, and the DAs were actually kind of cavalier about it. They said, hey, go get a warrant right now. And we did.
Yeah.
And so you had the preservation order, the information is still there. But 2 years later, 2.5 years later, Rick and I spent 2 years figuring out who didn't do it. Then a tip comes in. One of these guys' girlfriends gets beat up, and she drops a tip on him. And that was all it took. It played out quite well after that. And so I was around to get to watch some of this technology unfold. But that's us figuring out stuff as we go.
Now, because you have the luxury of all the social media and all the digital evidence, do you find that your interviews are less involved?
So that's something that I think is definitely, I've seen that change over the last few years, because people who are coming on now, number one, you have younger detectives who've themselves grown up with technology in a way that like I may not have in the same manner, but because there's such an emphasis on the Instagram and all those locations, that I think interviewing is less significant. I don't think that's correct. I think they need to understand that interrogation and interview is really an art form. I mean, it really is something that the only way to get better at it is to do it over and over and over again. And you learn from every interview something new. You learn a trick, you learn a phrase, and we'll use the same things. Like, are you a monster, or did this just go sideways? Like, we steal each other's little phrases. But yeah, people do rely, I think, too much on that stuff. But the other side of the coin is that as technology advances, it is more and more complicated. And there's all these safeguards built in. A lot of companies will close the back door so you can't access their data. And they want to protect customer privacy, and things delete after 24 hours and et cetera. So we're always kind of behind the 8 ball on that, because where do you start? I mean, everyone has 100 apps on their phone, and that's just for their one phone. And so it's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming, really. But you always want to keep back to basics. And back to basics is good old-fashioned cop work, canvassing, interrogation, looking for those linkages. Because we talked about before, if you lose a witness, if you lose evidence that gets suppressed, you have other things to fall back on. And what is better than a suspect demonstrating in an interview room how he killed that person and his anger? And I always say, just show the jury that, because that's who they really are. I mean, in an interview room, they have their suit, they're crying, they have a story, but in that moment where I've had them actually stand up and like pretend choke me and like, this is how I did this. And I'm like, keep going, don't hurt me, but let's play this thing out, because this looks great for a jury,
So I've seen this in just about every aspect of police work that I've been involved with, including the SWAT team. The guys before us, Danny, that didn't have robots that had to go in and clear every house from Jump Street, right? They didn't have another option. They were probably better at that aspect of that job. And I mean, the dogs, they've advanced so far, and even the stuff the guys in narcotics are doing, they do so many different search warrants for everything that previously you didn't have to do all that stuff. You just, you sat down with somebody, you talked to them, and you got them to confess to the things that they did. I love the fact that the technology is advancing, but I'm afraid that we're going to lose the skills that our forefathers had. And really, I mean, they crafted them and honed them sharply.
I will respectfully take a separate point of view on that, because everybody else in the society is doing the exact same thing. Law enforcement, just a cross section of the people around us. I can say one thing about what Andrea's talking about. You can go right back to two things. She's talking about stealing phrases. That's called behavioral mimicry. If you could go right back to the policy change in 2004. And then where we've got this monitoring room where we can sit, that's when Dallas PD became better. Mm-hmm. That's when I became better. I became better by copying Ken Penrod. I became better by copying like a Bobby Ermiting or a Randy Laboda.
I can still picture phrases that I stole from street cops, right? Just interviewing.
Yes. Yeah.
Lauren,
it works.
Yeah.
Lauren used to ask people when they would start mouthing off, he'd say, do I look like a game? Does it say Nintendo across my forehead? You trying to play me right here? And I remember it. It was one of my favorite things that he would say. And so I would use it, right? I mean, you take what works, and I love that aspect of the sharing through the department. And it's comforting to know that the homicide detectives do that. And I really like the take you have on the fact that you could go back and watch the videos and learn from yourself and learn from other people, even if you weren't there at the very present time. Because imagine how hard that would be to have 6 or 7 detectives in the video room trying to watch the same thing.
It happens. Everyone's in the room yelling at you. Shut up! He's about to tell you.
Oh, that's the hardest part, is watching, and you're like, oh my gosh, don't walk out. What are you doing? What are you doing? He's crying. Why are you leaving? But I took your class at the academy in March of 2013. I don't know. It was like your very first when you were over there, and you recorded us, and then I sent you back the video and said I want you to like critique me, because while I was in that class, I got selected for assaults. And so I became a detective like 2 weeks later. And so you were already out of homicide, but I knew you were one of the senior people. And so I had you watch my video and give me some tips. for the future. So we're trying to like pass on what you guys did to the next generation because they never get to work with you. And I never worked with you as a detective, but I was a patrol officer on your scenes, and I would always be that pesky officer just like asking a million questions and wanting to know how are you going to solve it. And so
Yeah, I think you did a cycle of training on interview tactics and techniques.
Mhm.
Was that 2013?
2010 is when I think
Yeah.
was that when you started the academy?
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, you can use that
I
stuff
gotta
at
give-
home.
Yeah.
I use
I've
it
gotta
on your
give-
on your spouses. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
I've got to give some credit here. There's a remarkable moment in Dallas PD history where two people change the course of Dallas and really the whole federal law enforcement system. There's a guy who was a Dallas police officer in the early 80s named Scott Donovan. And Scott went on to have a very stellar career with the United States Secret Service. Today, Scott is the director of the International Law Enforcement Academy in Budapest, Hungary. Scott was a polygraph examiner, and he is a highly skilled interviewer. He is one of the best in the world. The other one is Kevin Navarro, of all things. If you talk to Kevin Navarro, you should need to set aside a little extra time because nobody can talk. More
well,
than him.
I've talked to him about coming on. He will come on. Let's put it that way.
Oh, let me be here.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Yeah, because it's just not even the homicide stuff, but the RBT and everything.
Yes,
The pursuit class,
all the
everything.
training. Yeah.
Kevin changed the way law enforcement interviewing training is conducted across multiple agencies. Scott Donovan and Kevin were both in the same academy class together at Dallas PD, and so they're at a reunion and they have this idea. Hey, Scott is now at the Behavioral Science Division at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Kevin is in Training Division at Dallas PD, and it occurs to them that they don't. There's not a lot of good advanced interviewing training going around, and they get the idea to go interview inmates at the penitentiary, and they get hey, why did you confess to this guy? Then they go back and get the interrogation videos, and they go back and they interview the detectives themselves. Well, I was one of the ones that they interviewed, so I can't sit here and take credit for that. That's like I was very fortunate to be involved, but the ideas from this came right out of the head of Scott Donovan and Kevin Navarro, and if you guys are listening, I love you both. They are very dear friends.
I just text Kevin a picture of you sitting here, and I've been trying to get him on for over 2 years now, and he's so busy, and it's hard to get him locked in. He wants to do it, but
All you got to do is send him a message and say, "Here's the date and time. Be there." I mean, that's the way it kind of works with people who are that busy.
yeah.
Yes.
I want to get him on, and
Give him
I wanna-
two choices. Give him two choices on 2 dates. He'll pick
Yeah,
one.
exactly. Yeah.
well, he doesn't. Like you said, he changed the landscape of training here in Dallas PD and
Immensely.
beyond.
He if you look at the way that we haven't talked very much about the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center.
We're about to.
There are 124 partner organizations. In other words, there's 124 different federal agencies that send law enforcement personnel there to train. They've got campuses in Glencoe, Georgia, Artesia, New Mexico, Charleston, South Carolina, Cheltenham, Maryland. They train thousands and thousands of law enforcement professionals. And Kevin and Scott altered the way all these folks train when it comes to interviewing. I mean, you can't understate that.
That's why we got to get him on.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, this again, Kevin. You're going to listen to this. Let's get a date and set this up. Talk about the training that you went into when you just mentioned it.
Well, the Dallas PD is also highly unique in some aspects. When you go out to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, they have at their disposal FLETC has 500 role players, 500 of them. And so they do these mock interviews, their mock scenarios. They'll use role players from everything from situation-based training where they get shot at with blanks or marking rounds or whatever, and right on through to interrogations and victim witness interviews, all that stuff. When you come to Dallas, you are not getting that in the training division. I'm telling you right now. Often if you do, like my first idea for an interview interrogation class was to use, narcotics guys. These guys need to learn to act. We get them in role, stuff like that. Well, there's a problem with that. A good undercover guy does everything except for stay on a script. If you think about it, if you work in UC, the UC is not a script. You've got to be adaptable. You've got to change what you're doing. So when you get them in there, you give them a script, they'll do anything but follow that script. So it often turns into entertainment.
That's real important in training, is to have good training partners. I mean, you see that in boxing and everything else, but it's same with the SWAT team. It's like we have a training objective, and whoever is that person helping facilitate the training with role playing has to do a specific job and script in order to achieve that training objective.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. I watched it like, all right, these guys are having a great time, but they're not getting better at interviewing.
Right.
So what Dallas PD had an abundance of was actual prisoners. And that's where my good friend Danny here, the good folks at SWAT and the Barry Ragsdales of the world and all those countless other hard-working narcotics folks who go out, they go buy dope for us during the class, and then they do street-level stuff. SWAT guys would round them up, and then our class would interview these prisoners. And I believe that to be the cutting edge of training there, where you're in. Like, what happens when a dope case goes bad at Dallas PD? Well, you get another one. Yeah, tell me I'm wrong.
No, there are plenty.
Often in a dope case, the detective has the narcotics detective has a low interest in the interview anyway. He wants to preserve his identity. He doesn't necessarily feel compelled to interrogate this guy. And we were in Georgia. It was a very interesting case. We're at the Glenn County PD, and we're doing the same operation where we've got these drug suspects, and we've taught this detective cognitive interviewing, and he's in the interview room, and he's trying to get the suspect to remember the exact moment he buys it's not a UC, it's an informant, it's a CI, and his buddies figure out we don't need him to remember that. It was working too well, so they run in there and they interrupt. That's good enough. So you have to apply some thought and strategy when you're doing this. There's got to be boundaries, if you will.
Can you tell us about FLETC and what you did there?
I came in as a senior instructor, and I was I was in the investigative applications branch, and we trained federal agents to conduct interviews. They have a very interesting, what's called a continuing case. They get a case day one, and it's played out the whole 12 weeks they're there. And they interview people, they write warrants, they testify in court, they do tactics. Every task that a federal agent is expected to perform. We also trained uniformed federal police officers, the military branches, NCIS, Army CID, Coast Guard Investigative Service, Air Force OSI. Has a huge footprint. Air Force OSI I have to say, is impressive with interview training as well. They take that very seriously, and they've been very innovative over the years.
And what exactly did you instruct?
Interview interrogation, behavioral science. I spent about 90% of my time doing that.
Andrea, did you go through his FLETC class?
Yeah, I went through the class, I think 2022, and then I helped instruct out there every few months.
The federal FLETC still brings in a Dallas PD homicide detective to come and present a case study, and Andrea's done that for us.
And it's just really interesting because, everyone works in such different areas, and they have different structures, especially with federal. A lot of times they'll have their interviews scheduled weeks out, and they have sometimes more of a script they have to follow depending on what agency they're with, but they all get so much out of the class and the case study because it's all about how you talk to people, and it's all about just this method. And like I said, with interviews, there's just so much that goes into it. You're constantly keeping facts in the back of your mind to come back and hit them on later. You're thinking about strategy, about what evidence you want to disclose or not disclose, and strategic use of evidence, all those techniques. And so it's really interesting to see how the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center presents that and makes it work despite what you're investigating. It can still be applicable to different areas, which is interesting. So.
Since I want to put this out there for other officers, detectives, they're officers that want to be detectives in their career, because we have listeners across the country and even outside of the country. How can you convey the message of what you trained, all your experience in the training that you presented for DPD as well as FLETC, how can they be better detectives when it comes to interviewing and interrogations?
I would start with work ethic. If you're at a call, volunteer to write the report. If there's someone who needs to be interviewed that nobody else wants to talk to, volunteer to do it. Get used to doing more work. Embrace the idea of doing more. I would love to go out and work one more call with P.E. Jones again. Jones would never marginalize a soul. If there was a homeless person there, he'd go and speak to each of them. He'd control the situation. He talked to everybody. And that's what I would say. I would work on how I treat people. I would really get serious about treating everyone with respect, and that's hard. It's really challenging to think of other people that way, because a lot of people do things to make you angry. Being respectful and kind to someone else who doesn't want to be around you is challenging, and so you got to start thinking about that, how you treat people, and that and the old work ethic thing. I would seek feedback. I would go to training.
And you have to be intentional about that, I would imagine. Just be intentional about being in the same room with somebody that, you have a good idea of what they did, but also treat them with respect and being non-judgmental.
That's super challenging. One of the best interviews I ever saw was actually in Spanish, and it was Robert Arredondo, the chief over at Carrollton right now. And back in 2008, there's a guy named Edgar Murga, and he comes into a house, and he kills his sister-in-law, cuts her up real bad, and there's a child there, and there's two children in the room, and he cuts the little girl's throat, and her name was Daisy Arenas. She survives, and she survives to tell us who did it. But watching Robert go in that room and interview this guy and not judge him for cutting this 6-year-old was the cutest little girl. She was just as sweet. She is a genuine innocent victim. She has done nothing in the world to contribute to her own victimization, and yet he is going to treat this guy like a fellow human being with respect and dignity, and get a confession from him for that. That is not easy. If you're like me and you don't like bullies, the urge to reach across the table and
go Dexter on them.
You got it.
Yeah.
You have to suppress that. So, and it's moments like that you look back on, and you think you got to up your game. You've got to increase your level of effort.
Speaking of upping your game, what is something that even patrol officers could be doing out there on the street, and then hopefully that facilitates something that can be worked on even better when they finally bring suspects up to homicide? Or what can they do in the street that assists their investigations, or any detective who will later interview these people?
I think it's fair to say that we're just one mass casualty incident away from every uniformed cop becoming an interviewer. I mean, every police officer needs to be a very good interviewer. So one of the things I would suggest to patrol officers is, or even detectives, is understanding exactly what the interview is. What's going on there. You're actually working on somebody's memory. So understanding how memory works is pretty important to an interview. And so we ask ourselves a question. I'll ask you guys a question. How does memory get into your brain? How does a memory get there? Any thoughts, Joe?
I guess that whatever the incident that happened was so traumatic to that person, and it impressed upon them, that's left the impression of that moment.
You're close there. So when you talk about the trauma, often emotions will govern memories as well. But it's sensory input. your senses are collecting information all around us. Your brain is storing that information. And if you can very briefly touch on sensory input during an interview, you will get more information during the interview. So if the goal of the information if the goal of the interview is to collect more info for the purpose of solving a crime, if you will, or documenting a crime, then you need to be asking them not just what they saw. You need to be asking them what they heard. You might need to be asking them about, odors and smells. And it's super important is ask them, how'd that make you feel? And so those simple techniques right there, and once you ask those questions about the sensory input and how they feel, then all of a sudden you need to quit talking and let someone provide you with information. We patrol officers have a very powerful need to get information in sequence. We need it recorded. We need to report it back to us sequentially, and that's not how your recall works. It does. You don't remember things always in the order of occurrence. In fact, over the years, we brought witnesses up to capers and you'd interview them separately. If they told the exact same story, it'd bug us. We'd want a little deviation. We'd want a little bit of, if you will, discrepancy.
Yeah, and I was going to touch on that too. I mean, one of the things I learned, I can't remember who, in this room right now, I'm seeing a different viewpoint than you are. We're both still here, but we're seeing different things or hearing different things or observing different things. And that's the point, is that we're not going to all have the exact same thought, but every piece of our viewpoints makes the whole room. You know what I'm saying? And with the memory recall especially, I think it's about being adaptive to how people remember it. It's not always that they're trying to lie. I don't know what time it happened. Okay, was it dark out? Was it sunset? Was it,
Right.
Working with them in ways that they can recall, it can get you to what you're looking for. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Did you hear the gunshots? Were they coming from this side or that side? And that's how you build it. Because it's not always, it was at 8:04 p.m. and 3 gunshots north side of the street. But it doesn't mean that they're being unhelpful. You just have to find ways to get that information out. And you can if you just get creative and make sure you allow them to talk, like you said.
If you want to take the interview a step farther, there's a really interesting PhD at Florida International. His name's Ron Fisher, and he's got a book out. Him and a guy named Geiselman, Fisher and Geiselman. It's on investigative interviewing, and they've discovered something in their research that people watch TV shows. They get their impressions from the cop shows and things like that, and so people in general draw an assumption. They bring an assumption to an interview that if it's important, he'll ask me. So they don't volunteer information.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, even we as police officers do the same thing. Unless he asks me, if he doesn't bring it up, I'm not going to volunteer it. We've got
It's like on the stand, testifying.
Yes. So you've got to switch this this social construct, if you will, the social environment in the interview room is. You need to persuade them. I need for you to volunteer stuff. I wasn't there. You're the one that was there, and you have to encourage them to volunteer information that may not seem important to them, that could be very important to the investigator. It could be cooperative details. There's just. It's hard to describe. It's like if you ask why is there not more investigative training at the police academy? Well, we're assumed that the assumption is that most people can conduct an interview. Just say, go get this information. That it's that simple, and that's just a social misconception that's not true. If you want more information, if you want better information, you got to practice getting better information. I don't think they practice an interview in basic training. They didn't when I was there. Let's put it that way.
No, there's so much being thrown at you. They don't put a focus on that.
Yeah, the interview process is more just to collect the right information on
Yeah.
what their name is, what their address
As much as you would
is,
need for a traffic ticket.
to make a report.
Yeah.
I know.
A
I
simple
teach
offense
the
report.
Basic Academy for the general investigations, and we do the homicide practical. So we have 2 people act as homicide detectives, and we make them interview and do an interrogation in front of a whole class. I was that person when I was a rookie, when Kevin Navarro selected me. And so the ones who get to participate.
Weird. Kevin Navarro selected you
I know.
out of that whole
I was
class.
never an angel. Okay, I know.
You didn't need to be.
Well,
I think I may have to call you out on that one. So I'm not sure that's the truth.
what? No, I wasn't. I did like one vice operation, but that was it. So,
Only need one.
well, I was never PVOC or anything.
I love me some Kevin Navarro. I really do.
So do we.
If we get back on topic.
Yeah,
though,
back on topic.
Yeah.
I think we were discussing sensory input, and we were discussing cognitive interviewing, things like that, and Fisher and Geiselman, and practicing interviewing. I think that if you got to pull back some of the assumptions, if you will.
No, I have a note here about the science of memory recall, the importance of that. Can you talk about that?
That is the essence of every interview. That's the goal. I need for someone to remember something and then report it back to me.
And you find discrepancies within a timeline.
What people don't remember things when they report recall, it doesn't always come into their brain in sequence. It can be out of sequence. It comes from different portions of the brain. And so as an investigator, you need to be able to sort that out, or even as just an investigating patrol officer investigating an initial crime like that. There's there's 2 very super interesting studies. There's one that's a little bit older that, if you look at what's the greatest predictor of whether or not a crime will solve, and that's the initial police officer's first report. So, if you're FTOs out there, require your recruits to write very thorough offense reports. That is one of the greatest predictors. Then there's another one that actually went to Houston PD, where graduate students followed all the detectives around, and they measured how they spent their time. And one of the studies was based on behavioral science stuff, social sciences. The other one was from the criminologies, which are actually different fields of academia. And the criminologists studied how these Houston detectives spent their days. Everything from sitting in traffic, talking on the phone, cataloging evidence, putting it in the property room, conducting interviews, going to crime scenes. The greatest predictor from that study on whether or not a case would solve was the amount of time spent conducting interviews. What does that tell us? Slow them down. Slow those interviews down. Be patient. Don't be in a hurry. Eliminate distractions. If you're conducting an interview and you've got a crowd around you, it's not a good interview. I know that there are exceptions, but if you're looking to improve a moment, slow it down, get some privacy, put some effort. The number one technique to get more recall from a person is persuading them to try harder.
When it comes to memory recall, and keep in mind that I'm a dumb street cop and now turned podcaster. So
you're a lot of things, but dumb is not on the list.
So when you're doing memory recall, and if I'm a suspect and I am intentionally trying to skip parts in my story intentionally because I know my guilt and I know what I did, and I'm trying to I know that you're looking for certain things. Are there things that you're looking at in them and their story and their recall that you could fill in those holes they're intentionally trying to create in the story?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. One of the things you'll do at the onset of the interview is discuss expectations. You're going to discuss what the word omit means. I'm going to right up front tell you, all right, have you ever heard of the word omit or omission? And if they say no, and they often will, you explain to them, if I ask you a question and you leave something out on purpose, I'm going to view that as you lying to me. So I want you to understand that in advance. And if you built some rapport with them, they're like, gain some agreement with them. Again, ask them to simply tell you the truth. I need for you to tell me the truth and tell it to me completely. We can agree to that. Yes. You gain a social commitment from them to be truthful. Is it always going to work? No, of course not. But it's going to create within them
Dissonance if they lie to you.
Yes, they've agreed to do
or
it.
if they don't tell you something, it's going to create dissonance within themselves.
Exactly. You're going to cause them to have cognitive dissonance. And one of the things that I would look for, one of the things I would tell people when it comes to deception is I don't want you to look at their, I don't think looking at their eyes up and left, eyes up and right, that's not productive. If they have a tic, that's not productive. I would say instead, listen to what they're saying. Verbal indicators of truth. Actually, when they do the studies, cops are really pretty good at figuring out when someone's telling the truth. And they're 50-50 at best on figuring out whether or not someone's lying. So from that point of view, if they're giving you tons of details, we'll call it rich details, if they're volunteering information that you can prove that has nothing to do with it, then the likelihood is much greater that they're telling the truth. So I wouldn't focus so much on, confronting deception as I would being thorough and accurate. I'd also decide well in advance if, like, a strategy or what I view as successful outcome. If an admission or confession is critical, focus on admission confession. If you have the type of case like with Jose C. Fuentes, we didn't need him to confess, where information may be more valuable, choose to go for more information in advance. Have a plan. It's going to fall apart. What's Baron von, old guy from Germany, say? No plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Nice.
So it's that. Set a plan up, and if it changes, adapt with it. But I would not always be bent on admission confession. Those are good. Those are awesome. And you'll often get to them when you're hunting details. So understand your case and what your goal is.
I was just going to say, knowing your case is so important, because what evidence is going to get me on tab 7 versus what evidence is just, well, they're roommates. Of course, their DNA is going to be there. Their prints are going to be there. You have to find out what evidence is crucial to making your case versus extra you can add on to the whole story.
The second thing I would suggest for everybody, patrol officers, if you can get access to your body-worn camera video, if you can get access to your interview video, go back and watch them. Find someone you trust. Find someone senior or junior. Like good old, I have to say his name. Eddie Ibarra showed up as a better interrogator on day one. His very first murder confession was my case. It was a pretty easy one, but this poor guy killed his brother-in-law and then told every human being he had contact with that he did it after that.
So the pressure was off for Eddie. I mean, he was just like, it's just gravy.
I mean, the maintenance man's walking by. I killed him. And we got Eddie up there. I killed him. Okay. So you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Anyway, practice and then watch yourself, and make observations and have someone discuss with you. What do athletes do before games? They watch film. What do they do after a game? They watch film. And if they have a weakness, they get a strength coach in there and say, all right, we're going to up this activity, this particular, this burst drill or this lift or whatever it is to get better. It's the same thing with interviewing. When hey, when this person said this, you cut them off and you never went back to it. It's very similar to that. Because I'm telling you, that's when everybody at Dallas Homicide got better, is when we could watch each other.
Did that become a practice that across the board, were there just some people that really got buy-in with going back and watching film? Is that what y'all kind of did collectively? Is like, this is how we can get better. This is a tool.
Okay, that's not actually a fair assessment.
Okay.
We were all absolutely convinced that it was the worst idea in the world.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
I was probably the biggest naysayer. This is dumb.
Okay.
We're never going to get a confession. Again, everybody's going to learn our tricks. And I could not have been more wrong. I mean, I was just absolutely wrong. And you look back on it, and I think that it's a lot like the body-worn camera and the dash cam thing. Everyone thinks that it was going to be awful for law enforcement, and it's just just the opposite. Most police officers are decent human beings and treat people well, and most often it reveals the truth. And if the truth of the matter is that you're rude in an interview room, it's going to get revealed.
And that's something you're in control of.
How you treat someone is something you're absolutely in control of, yes.
But it also, I think, like body cam helps us, because in the interview, I was with him for 3 hours. I asked him, if there's another explanation, this is your chance. If you're telling me you were somewhere else, give me the information. I will go look into that. I will look into this alibi. But if I don't know what to look for, how can I look? Dallas is a big place. There's a lot of people. So when he goes to trial, I can say, I asked for information. I asked for witnesses. I asked for people to contact, and they gave me nothing. So how can I investigate nothing? So it shows that you're after the truth, not after that client. You're not going after one person. You're going after the whole story.
I think it's super important to be open-minded, too. I had more than one suspect. I actually had warrants on 2 different people. I had they weren't strong cases. It was single witness identifying them. That's probable cause. That's enough for a warrant. And get them in the interview room, and they persuaded me on 2 different occasions that they didn't do it. Then you go back and you put in the work, that extra effort we're talking about, and then you prove, yeah, I've got the wrong guy. That happened to me twice, and it really opened my eyes that, all right, I listened to this individual. And the fact of the matter is when you're working around dope cases, there's a lot of disinformation. There's just all kinds of things that can go wrong with those kind of cases. You're not going to just you're going to find a lot of people there who are smart, they're clever, they're crafty, and they have poor judgment. And so in a moment like an interview or an interrogation, they're going to lie their brains out to you.
John, you talked a lot about techniques and how the flow of an interview will go. Can you talk about when you're interviewing witnesses and at some point during the interview or turns into an interrogation of a suspect that you're actually in front of the actual suspect?
I'll give you one very brief, quick war story. I'm working with Ken Penrod one week, and it was during the summertime. We were short-staffed, so you find yourself going out on the same with calls on the same person over and over again. And me and Ken Penrod, on 2 occasions in 1 week, we go and knock on a door. We're looking for a witness, and on 2 separate occasions, we get there and we figure out we're talking to the suspect very quickly. It very rapidly unfolds. They say things to you that only someone who was there would know, and we both figure out neither one of us have handcuffs. And we very kindly, would you please come with us? And on 2 occasions, we talk suspects into a squad car or to a smooth car, and we go downtown. That happened to us twice in 1 week, and after that, I went to a shoulder holster that made you carry a set of handcuffs. But you're absolutely right. You're in a room, and you're talking to someone, and you realize they have way more information than they're supposed to. Often, you're talking to someone as a witness, and you have a group of people there. You've had a call go out, and somebody else that's being interviewed, one of your fellow detectives, will come and knock on the door and say, "You need to come out here." And you're talking to the suspect. These other people just told us. That happens occasionally as well. And
how does your mind change, like in the middle of it, when something hits your thought process? Holy shit! I believe now this is the guy or gal. How does that quickly? Because I would imagine you have to be deceptive that you're not actually onto them.
I would. You definitely. I think when it comes to an officer being deceptive, I would never encourage someone to bring a patent lie or a charade into an interview. I think sincerity is very powerful. And I think if someone asks you a question that would have you want to disclose something, you need to let them know there's going to be some conversational boundaries in here. I'm not going to tell you everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you questions that I already know the answer to. And so I would say withholding information is critical. It's Andrea mentioned the strategic use of evidence, and that's one of the tenets. Good detectives, their goal is to have the individual that you're interviewing tell you something that you can corroborate independently. In other words, I want them to tell me something that occurred there that only someone who was there would know.
And that's another reason why we don't release a lot of details to the media, is because we don't want A, false confessions, and B, someone who's mad at their ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend and is finding an opportunity to blame them. So there's a lot of things. I tell the family that. I'm like, it's nothing out of disrespect, but I'm going to keep some details about this to just the detective so that when we get the person, it's the right person. And I don't want to have a case fall apart because everyone knows every detail that there is.
There's few things more weird than a false confession. It's just weird. And
Have you encountered that?
yes, it's in just it.
Sorry, I was going to say, have you heard of The Confession Killer on Netflix? Linda Irwin is on it. This is the guy who confessed to being a...
Henry Lee Lucas.
Yes.
Henry Lee
murders.
Lucas. Linda Irwin, God bless Linda. She's still around. She was married to a motor jock. Linda was awesome to be around. I was there when she interviewed this guy.
Oh, were you?
She had
The fake case file.
she created a case file, and if you look at the Dallas case files, there's a fact sheet on the front of it, and it's there intentionally. The fact sheet is so that if a chief or the media calls, a supervisor can pick it up, and they can run through these quick facts, and they can disseminate information very quickly about the case. They can look at its status, things like that, and it just makes the unit more efficient. Well, the Rangers had Henry Lee Lucas. I don't remember where. I think he was out in Gregg County, maybe, but they had him in jail, and he was confessing to everything under the sun.
Like literally across the entire United States. It was like one murder in Arizona, and the next day I did a murder in Seattle. And you're like, that's not possible with the time. Like,
yes, it was
it's
suspect.
Insane.
So one of them, once it gets brought up as a cold case that Linda's working on, and she is dubious of the whole thing. She's already got a suspect that she doesn't have enough evidence to put it on him, but she's confident she's got the right suspect, and it's not that guy. So she puts together this completely fictitious fact sheet on the front of a case file, and she goes and she sits down with him, and she kind of pushed it to the side, and Henry Lee Lucas confessed to all the stuff that was on there, and then she knew. All right, she thanked them. I appreciate you. We'll be in touch, and she tells the Rangers, you got a problem. And so,
have you seen this, Joe?
No, I have not. I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
You should watch it because the scale of which people were saying clearing cases all over the United States. And you look at this guy and you're like, this guy is supposedly the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history and didn't leave any evidence behind. And it's just so shocking. But it's such a good explanation of like, you can't I want to be this person. I want it to be the easy close. It works. You really have to guard your details of your case and be open to like, hey, this may not be the person, and I need to look at different avenues.
I think that if you're going to be a detective, you have to be really wide open to the truth. You've got to pursue the truth, especially in murder cases. It's so critical. And if you're in like property crimes, it's really easy to get stuff confused. What makes a burglar quit doing burglaries? Getting arrested. What makes a serial robber quit doing robberies? Getting arrested. Then by the time you get these individuals into an interrogation room, they're trying to remember which cases you're talking about.
Yeah.
So here's another question for you then, John. I asked about what is something patrol officers could use as far as ideas in their mind about interviewing people, suspects, witnesses. We've decided to kind of put together a little series of training interviews, and you're the first one. I have some ideas for another one or two, and Joe does as well. I guess Kevin Navarro will probably be on as well. I'm going to ask you, what do you think we should have on for topics or for training?
I think that there is a real absence or a void of training on mass casualty, mass shooters, active shooters. If you look at that, law enforcement is actually pretty good about response to one. We have an active shooter, get people there. If you can do a 1 or a 2-man team or a 4-man team, how to execute that tactics, that training is there and in pretty good shape. But if you look at the before, left of the bang, or the after, right of the bang, is I've stolen that from Scott Donovan, by the way. Active shooters often engage in very similar behaviors leading up to what's going on. And so there's a branch, the Secret Service INTAC Unit, National Threat Assessment Center is what that stands for, does a really good job of what they call behavioral threat analysis. So the goal of behavioral threat analysis is not ever to predict someone's going to be violent. That's not their goal. Their goal is to prevent the violence. And it's we're not saying this person is absolutely going to be an active shooter, but they're on the pathway to that violence. And the whole, it started out at LAPD in their stalking unit. They had it off-ramps, is I think what they called it, off-ramps to violence, where you get someone, the Secret Service had an exceptional case study where they went and asked these would-be assassins, who some of them later became, and they abandoned their targeted protectee and they move on to like a schoolyard. And they ask them what motivated them and things like that. And it's very interesting. They have very common traits. And so psychology is just now picking up this field of study. And I think that's something that every law enforcement professional from coast to coast ought to have some training in. It doesn't need to be a part of basic training. It's not a basic skill. But it needs to come, somewhere. Start with the FTOs. Train them first. And let it work its way into every PD across the country. Because if we can prevent a single mass shooting, and we're never going to know we did it, it's unmeasurable, but it's there. And they would go from a threat analysis into threat management. If you look at the guy up at Buffalo who shot up the people in the grocery store. He'd previously been identified by a school counselor as, hey, this guy is a potential active shooter. He gets into a program, and he's very unusual. He gets evaluated by a psychologist, and that he's smart. He's learning from this, and so he goes on the sideline for a little bit. And then later on, he goes up to this grocery store up in Buffalo, New York, and becomes an active shooter. I think he was racially motivated in those, and he's most active shooters have an unresolved grievance. And I'll never forget, I've seen video from this exceptional case study. There's one kid, he's very young. He's like 13, 14 years old. Up in Arkansas, he kills a school, a yard full of school children. Later on, they ask him, what led you to do this? And his quote was, it stuck with me, is that I couldn't figure out how not to do it. Well, cops solve problems by arresting people. These individuals, like the guy up in Buffalo, he hasn't done anything that's an arrestable offense, but he's made it obvious that he has got the psychological traits that make him a potential active shooter. So there's your void. There's what law enforcement, what legislators, what people, in and around the community need to figure out. What do we do with these individuals who are identifiable, and how do we manage their behaviors? And that's an untouched topic. I believe the active shooter problem can be addressed. I think we can prevent them. I don't think we can stop all, but you can clearly reduce the numbers by finding these individuals. The second part of that, on the holistic view, is I don't think there's any training out there whatsoever on, okay, now it's happened. Now what's going to happen to your police department? And, we can go, we've done back a lot of lessons learned, a lot of debriefs. I spent time talking to Barry Ragsdale and Joe Garza and Andrea Isom, the captain up at Virginia Beach PD. We've Robert Quirk and I spent a lot of time on how to manage aftermath. And there's some common traits that go on there. Your radio communications are going to be chaotic and almost fail. You are going to very quickly overwhelm your case reporting system. Virginia Beach completely crashed their reporting system within 10 hours or 12 hours of that mass shooting up in Virginia Beach. That's going to happen. You're going to have 4 detectives respond to the Jacksonville Landing shooting and have 85 witnesses to interview. Yeah. You're going to give detectives and police officers a task that they cannot complete. And so, doing things like having reciprocal agreements. If Danny, I know you'll remember back to 2015 when headquarters gets attacked. How many SWAT teams did we have?
Well, we had one SWAT team and 4 squads, and that wasn't enough in some cases.
What we quickly learned is that you get a second BP come up, and then I think Garland or FBI came out and did a BP for you guys, because we've depleted our available resources. The same thing's going to occur at this mass casualty incident. You're going to deplete your resources, and if you know that, if it's predictable, why not set up a contingency for that? So that's something that commanders need to look at, is reciprocal agreements. I'd like to say that Dallas is not going to have another active shooter, but we all know it's coming again. We don't know when. Hopefully it's long after we're all gone.
Well, Dallas is probably better equipped than, Garland or Mesquite or one of the smaller agencies that don't have as many homicide detectives. We're really good so far. Like you mentioned, the SWAT team, they make sure that we're covered for any of those emergency situations, but I've never even thought about how we would handle something with that many detectives needed. And then you would need some sort of consistency amongst the training of those guys and the reporting and everything. So that's a really interesting point you bring up.
It's where the void is. It's where, if you're a law enforcement training professional, you need to be thinking about that. And so, my good friend Robert Quirk and I, he's retired Dallas homicide. He's out at FLETC as well. He and I, we developed a little flip chart. So, all right, you've never worked a murder before in your life, and your buddies just called up and said, hey, get up here. This thing's gone nuts. And if you've been to our training, there's your flip book. And it's going to help guide you through, how to triage these people. Who am I going to interview? Who am I going to send home? How am I going to preserve their memories as best I can? Things like that, because you're just not getting everybody interviewed. And so having a plan or a strategy, I love the way Vegas did after their big shooting. They found out one thing real quick, that they'd ran out of tourniquets. And so they went to all these big hotels now, and they have go bags for the PD there. And there's stuff with things like tourniquets, backup batteries for radios, and other gear for them. So I think it's the kind of thing like a station sergeant could have, or, if like the first round of interviews coming out of one of these incidents is not necessarily an investigative interview. It's an intelligence interview. On July 6th, Andrea's interviews over at the hospital were not about solving the case. They're about getting information to the SWAT team members that was critical for a better outcome. And if you're interviewing just one way, like if all my training so far has been, I got to be slow it down, just like I told everyone before, slow your interviews down. That's not always your luxury. You need critical information real fast for better outcomes for SWAT operators, or it could be patrol officers conducting searches of an area, things like that. So these interviews, you've got to scale them. And you've got to think about them in advance. And if you can get some kind of a strategy, and that's what the little flip book is all right, I'm overwhelmed. I've got my phone just going nuts. My radio's going nuts. My sergeant's calling. My lieutenant's calling. And I'm getting told, I have 2 different people giving me 3 different orders. What do I do next? Well, this helps you. All right, I've got this flip book and I can justify what I'm doing better, or I can maybe save a life. So if you ask me where that void is, gentlemen, get on it.
Captain John Palmer now, fishing boat Captain John Palmer. Amazing detective, FLETC trainer. Your time here is legendary, and that's why we have Detective Isom here. She had to be here because what you mean to her and her career, and what the practices that she uses today. She had to step away from the mic today. That it's the training that she got from you, and the hard work and the dedication, that part of that is from what you did here in this city, in this department. Do you want to leave the listener with a takeaway about all of your experiences and your time here with Dallas?
I do have some powerful feelings, and I'm going to share some feelings with you guys. I've always been real big on setting goals. And, the day before I started the police academy, I set a goal to be a homicide detective. And it took some years, but I got it done. When I went to training, I set a goal to carry on with Scott Donovan's and Kevin Navarro's work to put Dallas PD at the forefront of investigative skills and the forefront of interview skills. And I think we've seen that. And I want to leave each of you with one huge impression, and that's the Dallas Police Department does not realize how good they are at things. That I've you see adversity over and over again, and you internalize it, and this adversity can go one of two ways on you. It can become a corrosive factor, or it can become a motivator. And those who respond through motivation just get better and better and better at what they do. Now, this podcast is an superior example of that. You get a day like July 6th, and that night my phone blew up. I'd been gone just over a year, and I had my dear friend Joe Garza saying, "Dang, I wish you were here." I'm sitting at home crying. We all lost friends that day, and so you want to jump in and help. But I guess when you get into these feelings, you realize that, I'll never forget, we were, Dallas PD is involved in a study, and it's a body-worn camera study, and it's in conjunction with Arizona State University and Bill Terrell, Dr. Bill Terrell. It's pretty cool stuff. It's cutting-edge de-escalation study is what it is. And during that, we come back with study results, the Behavioral Science Division out here, and we want to provide these results, and we raise the possibility that, hey, maybe this de-escalation thing has some roots in hiring practices. And the chief on hand says the first thing we check them for is a pulse. Then if they can pass the PT, they're in. We need people. So you've got this balance of I want excellence versus staffing needs. And the real question is can you train the asshole out of somebody? That's the real question. Let y'all figure that one out too. But when you have an organization like the Dallas Police Department who has been chronically overstaffed for years, authorized strength versus actual staffing, what happens? A lot of things happen, but one of those is reps. These police officers get more and more repetitions. How do you get to mastery of anything? How many repetitions does it take? 10,000? Well, that's what you've got. You've got people like Andrea Isom, or I'll use the example of Kevin Navarro. When he first comes to homicide, he'll tell you that there wasn't enough time to properly train, so all he got was the laydown cases. And so he was interviewing people every night over and over again. And he says, I just got better and better at it through practice. Well, that's what's going on here. You've got just over 3,000 of some of the most practiced police officers in the world. Compare our staffing ratios with LA, Chicago, New York, and per capita, Dallas cops are getting dog years. You're getting 7-1. And it's making you better. The really good ones are rising to the top. You've got the Danny Canettis, the Joe Kings of the world, the Andrea Isoms, the Eddie Ibarras. The list is too long. By the way, I want to say that I did try out for SWAT once, and I got beat out by Claggett, and that's always hurt my feelings.
That's a tough loss.
I don't know. Maybe you can take him now.
I don't think so. The same day I tried out, it was him, and I kept up with him on the run, and that was it. What I'm telling you is Dallas Police Department produces very good detectives and very good officers. And if you're a college student listening, come here and be a cop. No, you're not going to get paid good. Yeah, your pension's going to suck, and there's going to be all kinds of problems. Whatever. Get over it. You're going to make compromises in your life. You're going to buy a house that costs way too much. You're going to commute too long. You're going to get stuck in traffic. And yet you're going to work with the finest police officers there are available. And that's what I would tell someone who's on the outside looking in. Come on in.